probably heard by now that eating enough protein is very, very important for basically any nutrition-related health goal, because it helps with muscle growth, with fat loss, with staying fuller for longer, with feeling more energized, and much more. But you've probably also noticed that hitting those recommended 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight can be a lot, especially if you don't feel like eating chicken breast all day, every day. So in this video, I'm sharing 7 ways that make it a lot easier to eat more protein without turning your fridge into a chicken farm. And these are realistic tips that I use myself every day as a lazy cook to hit my daily goal of about 130 grams of protein pretty effortlessly, even without protein shakes. Number 1, plan your meal around your protein, not your carb. If you're anything like past me or many of my clients, when you think about what you want to eat, you're starting your thoughts with, I feel like pasta or potatoes or a wrap. However, it makes a lot more sense to first think about protein source that you're going to include in your meal, and then plan the carbs and the rest of your meal around that. And to do that, it helps to have a list of your favorite protein sources. Here are some examples of the best protein sources out there. Feel free to screenshot and look at it whenever you need some inspiration. And when you have that list of your favorite protein sources, you can rotate through them every day. And that way you also know what to buy when you're grocery shopping, because you know, let's say your favorite protein sources are chicken, eggs, cottage cheese, and tofu. You will always have these 4 protein sources at home. And when you choose the protein source you're going to base your meal on, a good rule of thumb is to aim for 30 to 40 grams of protein per meal. That can come from only one protein source, but you can also combine different protein sources together to bump up that number. And I'll give more examples on those combo meals later. Okay, but what if you feel like pasta and don't want to think about the chicken or the cheese first? Well, the good thing about today's protein craze is that there's a lot of more options of classic foods with higher protein content, including, for example, pasta made from legumes. Which brings me to protein swaps. For so many foods, there's an alternative that has more protein than that other food. For example, when you talk about pasta, wheat pasta has about 12 grams of protein per 100 grams. Pasta made from red lentils has about 26 grams of protein per 100 grams. That is more than double. Then instead of using cream, use cottage cheese if you're making a soup or a sauce. Cottage cheese makes the soup or the sauce creamy, but it also adds a good amount of protein, and also it reduces the fat content, in case you're also trying to watch your calorie intake. Instead of regular bread, you can buy high quality, that's very important, protein bread, which is often made from some sort of soy, or you can make some protein bread yourself, where you replace some of the wheat flour, for example, with nut flour or legume flour, or you add in little pieces of edamame, for example, so soybeans. Instead of oat milk, drink either dairy, almond, or coconut milk, because these options have a lot more protein, unsweetened, obviously, always, or pea milk, also a lot of protein. Very good nutrition-wise. Instead of wheat or corn tortillas, use wraps made from lentil or chickpea flour. Either make them yourself and freeze them and then heat them up whenever you need it, or buy it at the store. Just make sure, again, that the ingredients are more or less clean. Instead of rice cakes, have chickpea or lentil cakes. But try to not be fooled by the food industry's marketing, I don't want to call it scam, but scam, where they put protein on everything, even things like Snickers or Mars or ice creams or chips, things that are really unhealthy, first of all, and second of all, usually the protein content is still pretty low. So whenever you see something labeled high protein, which sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Now, when you think of protein, you only think of animal products or soy or legumes. Actually, there's one type of protein source that is very often underestimated, and that is vegetables. Some vegetables have a really good amount of protein. Why do you think cows, for example, have muscles? They only eat grass. Still, they're pretty strong, and they have a lot of meat that we can eat, which is only muscle. Now, I'm not saying you should eat grass, but in vegetables like spinach, for example, or broccoli or Brussels sprouts or kale, there's actually a significant amount of protein, about 2 to 6 grams per cooked cup, which is about 200 grams. That one portion of spinach, for example, gives you about 6 grams of protein, which is the same as an egg. But obviously, spinach has a lot less calories than an egg, because the egg also has a lot of fats in it. Good fats, but again, if you're trying to keep your calories in check, vegetables are an amazing protein source. However, not on their own, because if we would only be eating protein from vegetables, we would not get all essential amino acids. I don't want to get into the science of amino acids here, but in short, amino acids are the building blocks of protein. So sub-proteins, if you want to call it that. And there are many of these amino acids, many different kinds, but especially 9 of them are essential, meaning we need all 9 of them. And we need all 9 of them in particular amounts. And if a protein source contains all 9 essential amino acids, that's when we call it a complete protein. And animal products are complete proteins. Most plants are not complete proteins. What does that mean? Vegetables like spinach do count into your protein goal, but only if you also eat other protein sources like either animals or animal products, soy, because soy is also a complete protein, eggs, or if you're vegan, for example, if you combine lots of plant-based proteins with each other to make sure that you get all 9 amino acids in the sufficient amounts. A high food variety is always important, always helpful, but especially when it comes to protein, especially for vegans or people who mainly eat plants. And if you're lazy and don't want to eat vegetables all the time because you have to wash them and cut them and cook them, frozen vegetables are not only more convenient, but also usually more nutritious because they usually get frozen right after harvesting. So they still have all their vitamins or most of their vitamins in them. While the fresh veggies in the supermarket is often laying around there for a couple of days, or at least it hasn't been cooled as much as it should have been. And speaking of making things easy, prepping your protein can really help, especially if you're a lazy cook like me, or if you don't have the time or the opportunity to cook for every single meal. I do this, for example, with chicken breast. I usually have a big chicken breast, or maybe 2, and I air fry them, and then I store them in an airtight container in the fridge, and then I use it up the next day, for example, for a salad, or maybe in a soup, or I just heat it up in a pan full of mixed frozen vegetables. Or something else that I love to prep is boiled eggs mixed with cottage cheese and mustard and salt and pepper, and then you have a wonderful little dip that is very protein rich and yummy and super versatile. You can either dip vegetables in it or bread or make a little sandwich out of it, and it lasts for at least a couple of days in the fridge. Or air fried tofu, which you can either just snack or add to a salad or to a sandwich. Air fried chickpeas. If you don't have an air fryer, you can do all of these things in the oven too, obviously. And that way you always have some protein source ready to get used up in your meal or your snack. Speaking of snacks, try to snack on protein and not on carbs. Most snacks available in the store or being recommended on your Instagram page or TikTok, whatever you use, are often carb-based. Maybe a combination of carbs and fats. But snacks are a wonderful opportunity to add in some extra grams of protein. Some of my favorite examples for protein-rich snacks is, for example, hard-boiled eggs. You can just pre-boil a couple of eggs every week or in the evening, and then you just have them in the fridge. They last for, not forever, but for a very long time. And then you can either just eat them as they are, or what I also like to do to make them taste a bit more interesting is to add a little bit of mustard. Just on the egg, and then just eat it. Mustard, if it's clean without any added sugar, is actually also pretty healthy. Cheese in general, especially the very protein-rich cheese with not so much fat, but even the fatty cheese has protein in it. Then, of course, cottage cheese right out of the package, or yogurt in general, quark, skyr, if you live in Europe and have these kinds of, dairy products. Lentil crackers, either on their own or even better with some nut butter. That's some of my absolute favorite snacks. Roasted chickpeas, again, you can also eat them as a snack. Either, like I said earlier, put them on a meal, on a salad, but you can also just put them in a bowl, snack them. Instead of popcorn, snack roasted chickpeas. If they're too boring by themselves, add in some herbs. Maybe some chili, maybe some garlic powder, some salt, some pepper, curry. It's delicious. Or edamame, either frozen and microwaved, or sometimes you can also find them in the vegetable area and you can just snack them as they are. Edamame is basically soybeans. If you're eating soy, and soy is an amazing protein source. Or if you eat meat, beef jerky or turkey jerky. Just try to find the one that does not have a lot of sugar, or even better, no sugar at all, which is hard to find, to be honest. Or, for example, if you feel like a pudding or an ice cream, I know I said no protein shake, but this is a little, extra idea, is to mix a little bit of protein shake. I personally prefer vegan protein shake for this, protein powder, and mix it with a milk of your choice, plant-based milk or dairy milk, not oat milk, for the protein and the blood sugar. Maybe add in some banana, some raw cocoa powder, and you have a little superfood pudding. And if you want it ice cream style, freeze the banana before and then munch the frozen banana, and then you have a little nice cream. Protein in ice cream. Now, this next step is something that I just started about a year ago or 1.5 years ago, and this is making my life so much easier, because before I was struggling so much at the end of the day hitting my protein goal, as now I start with a protein-rich breakfast. I used to eat mostly oats with some nuts, maybe some protein powder even, but I hit about 15, maybe 20 grams of protein in that breakfast. Now, however, having switched to a yogurt bowl or eggs or something with cheese, combined with a collagen matcha, yes, collagen also counts as protein, I easily get 30, rather 40 grams of protein in my breakfast, which is already almost a third of my daily protein goal. Because first, you already have a big chunk of your protein goal out of the way. Second, often the breakfast is the easiest to prepare or to care for yourself because, for example, if you work outside of your home, you cannot always influence what you're eating for lunch. For dinner, many of us eat with other people, whether that's your family, your friends, somewhere outside because you still have things to do. But breakfast is usually something you can either eat at home or even if you have to be somewhere, you can take it with you. You can prepare your yogurt bowl, your oats mixed with some protein powder, your eggs, hard-boiled in that case, and then just take it with you. But not only that, also, when you start with a high-protein breakfast, your hunger levels or your appetite is going to be much more stable throughout the whole day. In the Western countries like the US or Europe, we often think about the typical breakfast things. Oats, maybe eggs, yogurt, things like that. And these are some very good options, the oats if combined with other things that have a lot of protein in there. But in Asia, for example, it's very common to eat soup or fish or tofu or meat for breakfast, or just leftovers from dinner if you want to make it really easy. Here are some examples of different high protein breakfasts that'll make it a lot easier for you to start your day off protein rich. Now this next one might seem a bit too easy. It is too easy, is to just eat more of the protein source that you're already eating. And if you don't want to eat more overall because you want to watch your calories, simply reduce the portion of the carb you're having on your plate, for example the rice, and increase the protein because protein and carbs have the same amount of calories. Although the calories of the protein is actually worth less, so it's even better to bump it up if you want to watch calories. And that way you eat more protein without having to think about it because you just eat more of what's already there. If you need some more inspiration and want to see what I eat as a very lazy cook to get more than 120 grams of protein in a typical day, have a look at this video right here. And other than that, thank you so much for watching. You got the protein game, and I will hopefully see you in my next video.